Okay, welcome to the, I think the, for now, final video of the D4 series. I hope to have covered really all the major openings. Yeah, this is sort of the odds and ends. Let's start with the Budapest Gambit. Um, of course, yeah, white should take, of course. And now black has a choice. The pure Budapest would be knight g4, of course, but there's also the somewhat weird line knight e4. Yeah, maybe just start with knight e4. I never really understood the point of this, but it's still useful to know what's maybe the best line. And it's a move that you probably won't find for yourself if you never have seen it. The best move is actually a3 here, and the point is that black is not able to give this check here simply, which often is a helpful move here. I think now black really doesn't have satisfactory continuation. For instance, let's say knight c6, knight f3, and now black usually goes for d6, hoping that white would take here on d6, which is possible, but maybe not the best move. It has got some tricks, yeah. Just for instance, let's say you would take, and then just continue development. Then black has got cheap tricks like this going, and you actually have lost your queen. So it has got some points, yeah. But what you need to know is in this position the move queen c2, which is really fine for white. The point being that the normal move bishop f5 is not working simply because of knight c3. If black then goes for knight g3, you have the strong move e4, as knight h1, e takes f5 is basically a winning position for white. The knight on h1 will never get out, and you then have two pieces for the rook and an extra pawn and better center and so on. It's just over with good play. Black therefore needs to play d5 here in order to save the piece. Doesn't have much else. Then you can play simple chess, e3, and just develop. This situation in the center is just bad for black. What can you say? For instance, just an example line. If he develops now here, we can play something like this, and the knight is yeah, is lost, or black needs to try something along queen a5, b4, captures the rook, and queen e4, and this is also basically just over. Two pieces for a rook, completely silly queen on a1, and also tons of threats here. So if really someone comes up with knight e4, I think what you need to remember is a3 and just this trick here with bishop f5, knight c3. As I think most other things you can just handle at the board. Black has alternatives like d6, but then also queen c2 is a problem, as moves like this don't really help. You just develop knight f3 and b4. Important is just keep on developing and not try to grab a couple of pawns or something. Try to get your own development going. Black has moved lots of times with a knight and has managed to lose a pawn in the process, so it's no use to grab even more pawns and weaken the position or something. Just keep on developing. Also, black might try the tricky move b6, on which we also should just develop with knight f3. This tempting move actually could be a problem, as this really strange line traps the queen. So this is a neat little trap. You really cannot get the queen out now. Knight c5 is just a problem, or moves like a5, rook a7 or something. So important not to fall for queen d5. So queen f3, bishop b7 for instance, just develop. Here you can of course take this tempo here and then develop. It's just hard to believe that black should have compensation for the pawn here. So just remember to play a3 and play sensible moves afterwards, and you should be fine. Of course, this is really a rare line, and I basically never got this, I think, even in Blitz or something. It's really rare. Okay, knight g4 is played much more often, and here there's more than one good line for white. I like a sideline here actually, that I played with much success mostly in Blitz and Rapid. And it's got the advantage that you don't need to learn any theory, and it's just fine. This is the move e3. Quite simple. So black captures, you just return the pawn, and then play knight h3, which might look a bit weird at first sight, but the idea is shown afterwards. Let's just look at the main moves. Black mostly gives a check here now. Bishop d2, the exchange d6, knight f4. This is the idea. White wants to get the knight to f4 and set up a position which looks something like this here. And this is just a slight advantage. Versus the Budapest, I think you cannot expect to get a big overwhelming advantage. This is also not the case in the main lines, but white is just all the time somewhat better. He's got better central control, especially the square d5 is a problem. Very often white gets a piece on d5, of course a knight most often, and black almost never can afford to play c7, c6, as then the d6 pawn would be awfully weak. This is just a nice position. You can grab more space in the center maybe later. For instance, just place a knight here and then e4, f4 maybe, or you can also play on the queen side. It's very easy for white to get something going here, and black doesn't have any significant plans. Especially he cannot move any pawns. This is just the problem in this position. c6, as mentioned, weakens d6. He can play b6, but this makes playing c6 later even more unlikely. Cannot move the f pawn or something. It's just somewhat passive. So you can be, I think, very satisfied with this kind of position. And white setup is almost always the same. Sometimes black also plays something like this, d6, knight f4 again, g6, and you just develop, as mentioned, and get a somewhat better position. It's not a huge advantage, but it's just a position where white can press for more without any risks. Black doesn't have any active plans, and you can just choose if you want to play in the center with e4, bishop e3, or maybe play b3, maybe not immediately, but go for b3, bishop b2, knight d5. White can make some steady progress here, and this is difficult for black. So I think this is a really good sideline. Of course, if you want to invest some time, you can also study main lines like bishop f4 or knight f3. They're all pretty good and lead to some slight advantage, but I always like this idea, as you don't need to know any specific theory and you can still get some slight advantage. Yeah, this was the Budapest. What else can black play? There's actually a tricky move, which I almost forgot to mention. This is here. Knight c6, the black knight's tango, or just the tango variation. This is really a rather respectable opening. Looks a bit weird at first sight, but it's interesting. Yeah, I'd like to recommend also two lines here. The main line, maybe the main line, is also a good line. Let me just show you. Knight f3, e6 is mostly played, and then important move a3. Of course, white has got other options like knight c3, for instance, is also fine. But after bishop b4, we have got some strange kind of Nimzo-Indian, where these knights are played, knight f3 and knight c6, and it doesn't really match the repertoire choices versus the Nimzo, as there the main plan is to go for f3 and e4, so I didn't want to play Nimzo with a knight here. It's okay, if you like this position, you can go for it. A3, of course, the main move to prevent bishop b4, and then black mostly switches to some kind of King's Indian setup with d6 and g6, e4, bishop g7, and then now I think the most promising is h3, castles, bishop g5. For instance, h6, bishop e3, rook e8, and bishop d3. This should be somewhat better for white. It's not a great advantage, but black most likely will set up some sort of King's Indian formation with e5. It's okay to play for white. You just maybe need to look at a couple of more games, and then you're ready to go for this. It's a very rare line, so I think this h3 bishop g5 is a good answer. Okay, another idea that white could try here is actually to really play knight c3. It isn't played that often, but I'm not sure why. Maybe white players prefer to have a somewhat simpler play with knight f3, but here there are interesting ideas. Let's say e5, d5, knight e7, and now the very sharp and concrete move h4. The idea is that black is yeah, somewhat stuck here on the king side. He'd like to play knight g6, but on knight g6, of course, then you get kicked with h5. This was the idea of h4. So by far the main move here is a somewhat strange looking knight e to g8 in order to really develop the bishop, and this white should address with a3. No, it looks a bit silly here. This whole sequence of moves with h4 and a3, but it all served the concrete purpose. Now black most often plays something like a5 to make sure that he gets some space here on the queen side. And then I found some games with e3, bishop c5, and then the really aggressive move g4. This kind of line is interesting because white grabs a lot of space here on the king side and also in the center, and it's not so easy to see where black might get some counterplay. I very much prefer white in this position. But it's a bit unconventional. You should just pick one line here against the tango. This is a really sharp suggestion, or go with the a3 setup as I mentioned. It's just good to look at something, because if you see this for the first time, you might get tempted into other tries that are really not so great. For instance, just to have a look, if you, for instance, try to win lots of time here, you might get into early trouble. For instance, this move has been tried with the idea that this picks up a knight, e4, e6, And this whole setup is somewhat problematic for white, because black is really quick in developing. For instance, let's say knight c3, bishop b4, and now you need to take care about this pawn here. And let's say this kind of line, and black has already got 3 pieces out, will castle, and is already trying to open up the center. It's really dangerous for white, this kind of line. I think this wasn't even the best way to play it with black. So make sure not to get tempted into refuting this, or trying to refute this with moves like d5. Just pick one of the lines that I mentioned, or another one. For instance, this one, of course. Oops, I meant this one. Knight c3, bishop b4. This is also fine. Like queen c2 and so on. Just pick one line and play this, and not try to refute this this rather rare setup. But it has got some bite. I played this myself a couple of times with black, and it's better than it looks. Okay, we're almost through, I think. One move I need to mention is the move d6 here. Knight c3, and now of course g6 would transpose to a regular King's Indian, but black might also try other things. For instance, knight bd7 or e5. And both these moves are somewhat tricky. Because if you play one of the lines that I recommended versus the King's Indian, the lines I mentioned all involve not to play an early knight f3, but against these setups, knight bd7 or also e5, it's pretty much a fact that white should play knight f3. And let's say knight f3, e5, e4, and if black now goes into a King's Indian setup, which he can with g6, you get a regular King's Indian with a knight on f3, which is a completely different variation. Of course, black has got the knight on d7, so you don't need to learn all the lines. It's just one line, the line with knight bd7, but it's still something you need to look at. I can recommend as good moves here bishop e3 or queen c2. There are others, but these are, I think, maybe the most challenging for black. This was a move order with knight bd7, but it can also happen via this move order: e5, knight f3, knight bd7, and e4, and you get the same kind of line after g6. So this is one way to go about this. The other idea would be to play something else like e4, e5, and then if you maybe play the Sämisch, which is one recommendation, you could also play just similar to the Sämisch, which is also fine. For instance, a setup like this is very similar to the Sämisch, but black here hasn't played g6, bishop g7, but plays the bishop here. He could maybe try in this position to play h6 to exchange the bishop, and then maybe g3 to have f4 against this idea. So this is an idea for people who play the Sämisch to set up similar as in this line. After e5, immediately it is a bit more tricky to get into this, but you could also, instead of knight f3, which is the main move, play d5 here, and then continue with e4 and f3, which would be just a chance position. The other idea here, if you decide for the knight f3 setup, of course, is that black, of course, doesn't need to play g6. He can also play bishop e7, the old Indian, After this, I think this line is maybe the best one, with the main continuation being a6, d5, cd5, cd5, b5, knight d2, knight b6 and a4, which is slightly better for white. Yeah, you need to make a choice here. Of course, this is really a rare move order. It is played really. It's not played often. I can't remember that I really got this. I think I got it in one tournament game in 20 years or something. But so it's not advisable to spend a huge amount of time here. But it's useful to have seen it once and to decide what kind of setup you might try. There are also some sidelines here. For instance, after e5, knight f3. Black might also try e4 here, which is possible. After that, white can try bishop knight g5 or knight d2. If you, for instance, play the French, it's just interesting to play knight d2 and go for some sort of reverse trench, where black has played somewhat strange moves, bishop f5 or bishop f4, if you think of it with reversed colors, and d6 or d3 from white's point of view. Yeah, it's a rare line. These kind of lines, I think, are really a bit underestimated by theory. They're not that bad. You cannot refute them, and white players usually don't know any detailed variations here, and it makes sense not to know that much, as it is never played. So just pick one line. Decide if you want to go for knight f3. The knight f3 setup. Okay, this is a bit of work, as you should acquaint yourself a bit with the King's Indian line. Or decide to play, for instance, this one, or in the knight bd7 move order to go for the Zamish here, for instance, in this move order. So it's I think it's usually these kind of lines are somewhat better for white, but it's useful to to have some vague idea how you should play. Yeah, I think that's it. I think I've handled all the moves that somehow are respectable after 1d4. Yeah, thanks for watching, and if I have forgotten some really important line, please mention it in the comments, and I'll do further videos to complete this series. Yeah, also make sure to subscribe to the channel if you like to get informed about further uploads. It's free and very useful to keep up to date. Yeah, thanks, and until the next video.